All right, ladies and gentlemen, at the time of me making this video, it is currently Friday, May 8th. I had just found out last night about the new schedule change. Uh, because now instead of a final, we're having a project. You got time to do that project. So I'm going to be skipping our last chapter. Our last chapter was supposed to be ecology. I'll put up a video later on because I'm going to try to include that in the project. Only a little bit though. Don't worry about it. I won't confuse you with it. But this is going to be our last chapter. Without that last chapter now gone, we have a little bit of extra time to fill. So I wanted to spend this time talking about some Charles Darwin. So let's get ourselves into this. All right. Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. If you do not recall me talking about this guy, this is one of the people who was in the forefront of talking about not evolution, but natural selection. Right? Evolution was already a thing. Natural selection, according to Darwin, is what causes evolution to happen in nature. That is what his big deal is. So that's what we're going to read about. A little bit of a history lesson. Make sure I got the right page order. Cool. And the puzzles of life's diversity. By the way, guys, I am posting this as a PDF. If you are sick of hearing my voice, you can close this video and go down and read it yourself. But for the rest of us, let's begin. Nature presents scientists with a puzzle. Humans share the earth with millions of other kinds of organisms, every imaginable shape, size, and habitat. This variety of living things is called biological diversity, or difference in living things, how living things are different. How did all these different organisms arise? How are they related? These questions make up the puzzle of life's diversity. What scientific explanation can account for the diversity of life? The answer is a collection of scientific facts, observations, and hypotheses known as evolutionary theory. Evolution, or change over time, is the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. A theory is a well-supported, testable explanation of phenomena that have occurred in the natural world. Basically, evolution says change over time. At this point, we should be well aware, not just change, but change in the allele frequency of a species, or how the next generation looks different than the previous generation. All right, the voyage of the Beagle. And we are not talking about a dog, that is the name of a ship. The individual who contributed more to our understanding of evolution than anyone was Charles Darwin. Darwin was born in England on February 12, 1809, the same day as Abraham Lincoln. Shortly after completing his college studies, Darwin joined the crew of the HMS Beagle. In 1831, he set sail from England for a voyage around the world. His route is shown in figure 15-1. All right, starting in Europe. Went down, South America, bounced around a bit, went up South America to the Galapagos Islands, right here off the coast of South America. All right, that's important, remember that. And then went around the world, New Zealand, Australia, Indian Ocean, and then around Africa, and then South America again, back home to England. All right. Although no one knew it at the time, this was one of the most important voyages in the history of science. Key symbol here means it's very important. During his travels, Darwin made numerous observations and collected evidence that led him to propose the revolutionary hypothesis about the way life changes over time. That hypothesis, now supported by a huge body of evidence, has become the theory of evolution. Remember what I said. His deal wasn't evolution in itself. It was what causes evolution. All right. Wherever the ship anchored, Darwin went ashore to collect plant and animal species that he added to an ever growing collection. At sea, between bouts of seasickness, he studied his specimens, read the latest scientific books, and filled many notebooks with his observations and thoughts. Darwin was well educated and had a strong interest in natural history. His curiosity and analytical nature were ultimately the keys to his success as a scientist. During his travels, Darwin came to view every new finding as a piece of extraordinary puzzle, a scientific explanation for the diversity of life on this planet. Darwin's observations. Darwin knew a great deal about the plants and animals of his native country, but he saw far more diversity during his travels. For example, during a single day in the Brazilian forest, Darwin collected 68 different beetle species, despite the fact that he was not even searching for beetles. He began to realize that an enormous number of species inhabit the earth. Patterns of diversity. Darwin was intrigued by the fact that so many plants and animals seemed remarkably well suited to whatever environment it inhabited. He was impressed by the many ways in which organisms survived and produced offspring. He wondered if there was some process that led to the variety of ways of reproducing. All right, what all this means, guys, he thought it was really cool that the animals that he studied just seemed to work very well where they lived. Right? If you and I were to move to the North Pole, we would probably freeze to death. Just like as we are now sitting around in t-shirts, we would probably freeze to death in the North Pole. But these animals, wherever they lived, they didn't have to put on like jackets or anything like that. They were already well suited. And he wanted to know, how did they get that way? How did your body know what this environment was going to be like? Darwin was also puzzled by where different species lived and did not live. He visited Argentina and Australia, for example, which had similar grassland ecosystems, yet those grasslands were inhabited by very different animals. Also, neither Argentina nor Australia was home to the sorts of animals that lived in European grasslands. For Darwin, these patterns posed challenging questions. Why were there no rabbits in Australia despite the presence of habitats that seemed perfect for them? Similarly, can never say that right, why were there no kangaroos in England? Right. Before we move on, take a look at this figure, 15.2. Many of the fossils that Darwin discovered resembled living organisms, but were not identical to them. Glycoptodon, an extinct animal known only from fossil remains, is an ancient relative to the armadillo of South America. What are some similarities and differences between these two animals? Well, let you decide looking at that. Make sure we have the right pages here. 1. All right, 371. So remember, he took a stop at the Galapagos Islands. Here they are. So that picture is going to be important. Living organisms and fossils. Darwin soon realized that living animals represented just part of the puzzle posed by the natural world. In many places during his voyage, Darwin collected the preserved remains of ancient organisms called fossils. We saw that on that last page. Some of those fossils resembled organisms that were still alive, as shown in 15-2. We just looked at that. Others looked completely unlike any creature he had ever seen. As Darwin studied fossils, new questions arose. Why had so many of these species disappeared? How are they related to the living species? Now, the Galapagos Islands. This is where important discoveries were made. This is where things clicked for him. Of all of the Beagle's ports of call, the one that influenced Darwin the most was a group of small islands located 1,000 kilometers west of South America. These are the Galapagos Islands. These islands right here. Darwin noted that although they were close together, the islands had very different climates. The smallest, lowest islands were hot, dry, and nearly barren. Hood Island, for example, had sparse vegetation. The higher islands had greater rainfall and different assortment of plants and animals. Isabella Island had rich vegetation that tortoises could easily reach. Darwin was fascinated in particular by the land of tortoises and marine iguanas that lived in the Galapagos. He learned from the vice governor that the islands had the giant tortoises. Again. He learned from the vice governor of the islands that the giant tortoises varied in predictable ways from one island to another, as shown in figure 15-3. Let's take a look here. Meaning the tortoises on Pinta Island look a little different than the ones on Hood Island, which look very different than the ones on Isabella Island. And you can look at these three tortoises and see clear differences. Thicker head, bumpier shell, even smaller bumps, but a lot more bumps, smoother shell. And you get the idea. The shape of the tortoise's shells could be used to identify which island a particular tortoise inhabited. Darwin later admitted in his notes that he did not for some time pay sufficient attention to this statement. Darwin also saw several types of small, ordinary-looking brown birds hopping around, looking for seeds. As an eager naturalist, he collected several specimens as shown in 15-4. So these are, over here, birds that he had collected, he killed, had stuffed, and used them to study. However, he did not find them particularly unusual or important. As Darwin examined the birds, he noted that they had different shaped beaks. He thought that some of the birds were wrens and some were warblers, and some were blackbirds. But he came to no other conclusions at first. And then the journey home. While heading home, Darwin spent a great deal of time thinking about his findings, examining different mockingbirds from the Galapagos. Darwin noticed that individual birds collected from the island of Floriana, looked different from those collected on James Island. They also looked different from individuals collected on other islands. Darwin also remembered that the vice governor had told him about the tortoises. Although Darwin did not immediately understand the reason for these patterns, he had stumbled across an important finding. Darwin observed that the characteristics of many animals and plants varied noticeably among the different islands of the Galapagos. What that means is the animals on one island all kind of look like each other, but they look different than the ones on a different island. And there's a reason for that. After returning to England, Darwin began to wonder if animals living on different islands had once been members of the same species. According to this hypothesis, these separate species would have evolved from an original South American ancestor species after becoming isolated from one another. Was this possible? If so, it would turn people's views of the natural world upside down. And this reading left out a lot of details about his hypothesis. But take a look at this map. These are the Galapagos Islands. Let's talk about the tortoise. He thinks maybe there was a tortoise that got separated as the islands got separated from the land, and it was all the same species of tortoise across those different islands. See if I can find. There we go. All the different tortoises across these different islands. And because they were separated, we talked about isolating mechanisms, things that prevent them from breeding with each other, in this case, being on different islands. These tortoises could not breed with these tortoises, and they could not breed with these tortoises. So they were stuck, just these guys were reproducing with each other, and that was it. And they started spreading the genes that were good for this environment, that made them fit for this environment. The ones on this island spread the genes that made them fit for this environment, and the ones on this island spread the genes that made them fit for this environment. And that's his hypothesis, is that caused one original species to start changing into three different species based on 3 different needs. That was his idea of natural selection, causing evolution. All right, guys, go back into Google Classroom and you will find an assignment that looks something like this. I am going to change it up to make it doable online, probably on a Google form. So good luck, and I will see you in the next video.